Hello, everybody. We're back. I just started this episode right after I ended the previous one. We are talking about Tien's mid-game and what our research priorities should be. And we were talking about the enchantment tree in particular. So there's so much stuff to talk about here. So we mentioned that Heat from Hell or Grip of Winter, definitely worth it, especially if your opponent prefers one or the other type of climate. And we're putting up relief for ourselves anyways. Speaking of fatigue plays, Rigor Mortis, do you do it well? Typically, in order to put it up, it's assuming that you've already gotten liches, because we don't really have any other death access. So if you have liches, like this is getting really early late game. Are you bringing a lich to do Rigor Mortis? You could. Sorry, I bumped the mic there. Rigor Mortis... again, this is one of those things that it's going to affect us as much as it affects them. So you got to make sure that it's going to be more of a problem for them than it is going to be for us. Some nations have fatigue issues, but it's not like we're bringing like communions to spam skeletons, right? We're still fighting with living units that are also going to be affected by rigor mortis. So typically not an amazing call here. One thing we do need to talk about is arrow fend and archery in general. So in the minions, arrows and crossbows are quite powerful, I think, in the early game. Some nations are somewhat immune to them just because, like, for example, Tien actually has amazing shields. Pretty much immune to arrow fire. But other nations are very vulnerable to it. Unless they have air access. So that's the big if. So if you are fighting a nation that has air access, you are on a timer. Because if I was fighting Tien or Man or whatever, right? I'd certainly be rushing Enchantment 6 to get Arrow Fend. Because that is going to change the game. So you got to be careful not to overcommit to crossbows or whatever. If you're fighting an opponent, if you know that they're going to reach arrow fend at some point soon. Now, that being said, if you, for whatever reason, have decided that you're going to be using a lot of crossbows and archers, you also want arrow fend for your own troops so that you don't shoot your own guys in the back, right? It reduces friendly fire by a lot. Arrow fend is also really nice to put up when you're doing siege battles. And you should try to put it up on the first turn so that their archers on the wall don't one-shot kill your squishy little mages and sadness ensues. That happens so many times. What a pain. So Arrow Fend is definitely a great target. Now only at Enchantment 6 we get Eternal Power, which is a great gem generator. Now fire is kind of... this requires fire 6, so this is going to be a pretender. But a pretender has fire 3. We can do the death fire, that's +1. A hat gives you +2. But then you need like a ring of wizardry. So for us, for our build, it's a little tricky to get this, but it's totally doable. Definitely, gem generators are definitely worth getting. If you've got the resources, go for it, is what I say. At the end of the early game, we had gotten to at least Enchantment 3 because we needed Strength of Giants, right? By now, you've probably grabbed Enchantment 4, if only for anti-magic, because it's such a useful spell that you just want to make sure you have up in almost all of your battles. Possibly, in fact, it's most likely, if you're doing any kind of archery play, which I think is a strong play to do as Tien, you've gotten Flaming Arrows as well. So definitely, you've already gotten Enchantment 4. Similarly, you've probably gone up to Enchantment 5 because you needed resists. Now, maybe you got them in Alteration 5 as well. So both are options. So maybe at this point, before the mid-game, maybe you're sitting at Enchantment 4. Maybe you're already at Enchantment 5, okay? At this point, Enchantment 6 is a great grab because depending on who you're fighting, this might be absolutely crucial. So first of all, If you're fighting an opponent that is using archers, like, yeah, sure, all of your guys have shields, but why not get our own arrow fend up, right, to protect against that? If you're fighting against a Death Nation, you need to get Enchantment 6 because you need to get relief, okay? So we're talking here like, it's the beginning of the mid-game. Which of these paths do I prioritize? Enchantment is one of the ones at the top of your list. What are the other targets that we absolutely want to hit that you kind of need to not lose in a war, okay? Because obviously, like, Mass Regeneration is like, that's the thing we want, right? That is the spell. Obviously there are other great spells, but that's definitely what we're looking for. But that's Enchantment 8. That's a lot of research to get there. You're not going to get it right away. So some of the targets where you really need to aim for are Relief if you're fighting a Death Nation, and Serpent's Blessing if you're fighting anybody who's going to do Foul Vapors. And there's a lot of people who are going to do Foul Vapors. It's not that hard to do. It's nature water. Definitely an important target. Mass Flight is actually also situationally crucial if you're fighting against, like, let's say, Agartha or an Earthquake casting nation. Then you need Mass Flight. You need to get Mass Flight up on turn 1, and you might even need to craft the item. There's a helmet that makes you cast things faster. It's in Construction 6, which is called the Crown of the Magi. Fast casting 30. If you put this on an air mage who can cast Storm on the first turn, then they will get Storm off before the Earthquake gets off. So Mass Flight might be an absolute necessity, or it might be just fun to have. Typically, against most matchups, your army is going to be pretty scary. And the one with the scary army should always be the one doing Mass Flight. And in fact, if I ever show you this battle where I take Mictlan, you'll see Mass Flight plays a role there. Mass Flighting heavy cav onto the enemy's back lines is very powerful, always good stuff. So that's, again, we just finished the early game. We're looking into the mid game. What are our research targets going to be? These are things that you might need to grab early on. Yes, of course, eventually we're going to get to Enchantment 8 for Mass Regeneration. And Mass Regeneration and the Mass Resists. I know, we'll get there, right? But before you get to Enchantment 8, maybe you need to go to Alteration. Maybe there's some other things that you need to do. But Mass Flight, if you're fighting Agartha, you need to rush this, because otherwise they're just going to murder you with Earthquakes, for example, right? If you're fighting Satis, you need to rush Serpent's Blessing. There's no choice, okay? In my particular game, I did not need to rush any of these in particular, so I had the choice between going for Enchantment or going for Alteration. I should mention that Enchantment has amazing globals, right? So if you do end up going down Enchantment, not only do we have Eternal Pyre down here, but we have Earthblood Deepwell as well as Stellar Focus, which are other great gem gens. And we have our Gift of Health down here, which, remember, we talked a lot about before, and I was saying how I think it's a good idea to get this up early, and I still stand by that. So great globals down here. For all of those reasons, I tend to go down Enchantment 7 before I poke down Alteration. Sometimes even, I typically go to Enchantment 8 before I go deep down in Alteration. But before that makes sense, we have to talk about Alteration, so let's do that. So at the end of the early game, we definitely have Alteration 5, I would say. I mean, we went to Alteration 4, but we definitely got all the way to 5 because we wanted Wooden Warriors, right? And this has given us some resists, so we're in a pretty good spot. Now, so imagine you're sitting at Alteration 5, you're also sitting at Enchantment 5. Which one do you push first? So we talked a bit about Enchantment. What's available to us in Alteration? I think the big stumbling block is Alteration 6, which doesn't give us much as Tien. I'm just saying, right? We do get Frozen Heart, which is a great thing that your random Water 1 useless mages can cast if you were desperate. So sure, right? None of these other spells are really relevant for us, to tell you the truth. These are great spells for other nations or for other kinds of, fighting, but for us, this is not really relevant. That's why it's kind of harder to justify going into Alteration 6 first, because, Enchantment 6 gave us, the fatigue spells, it gave us relief, and we've got a potential for a global here, and it's setting us up for Enchantment 7. Now, what else do we have here in Alteration once we go past 6? Alteration 7 is people love because you get Mass Protection and Fog Warriors. So this is a fantastic level. Doom is also kind of nice, right? So Alteration 7 at Mass Protection and Fog Warriors is really, really strong. I mean, Creeping Doom is also very strong. There's a lot of really strong stuff here, okay? But specifically, these are the two spells, Fog Warriors and Mass Protection. So even though Alteration 6 is kind of iffy, Alteration 7 is really where the money is at. So, in my opinion, if you are fighting a nation where you need poison resistance or you need to not die to earthquakes, I would get Enchantment 7 first. Otherwise, I would probably do, let's say you were sitting at Enchantment and Alteration 5, I would probably, in most cases, go Enchantment 6 first. This would give me a few just useful spells like Arrow Fend, right? Relief, things like that. And gives you a shot at getting Eternal Pyre, okay? We get Enchantment 6, then I would go and do Alteration 7, because Fog Warriors is just such an amazing spell, which is not hard for us to cast with Communions. Mass Protection is also an amazing spell. It's going to buff our chaff, make them really buff. No doubt about it. Afterwards, do we keep going down Alteration or we keep going to Enchantment? I think you go Enchantment, but let's talk about what we'd be missing in Alteration. Alteration 8 has more resists. The only good spell, these are all good spells, but Will of the Fates is the key spell here, which gives luck to all your units, very powerful spell. And then finally, Alteration 9 gives us the army of whatever spells, which are very, very powerful. So as Tien, honestly, you're going to be fighting with troops that have very good protection. If you're giving them Mass Protection in addition to their built-in armor, plus Fog Warriors, they're going to be pretty tanky already. It's not super crucial that we go up to Army of Gold right away. And in my opinion, it is more valuable to go grab this stuff in Enchantment 8 because Mass Regeneration is amazing. And these resistances might be easier for you to cast. After and the other thing is Enchantment 8 also gets you into Death finally. Because up until this point, you probably only have your Pretender, who's a real Death Mage. And now you can finally get your Liches going and start to shore up your Death situation and your Death income and all the crafting that you need to do for that. So I kind of like to ladder between these two. So maybe we get Enchantment 6, then you go Alteration 6, Alteration 7, then Enchantment 7, Enchantment 8. Now, and then you're in the situation where we're in now, okay? So we have Alteration 7, Enchantment 8 done. Now in this game, I decided, hey, let's go do something funny in Evocation. That could be legit. Maybe you want to go try to do some Flames from the Sky Cheese against your opponent. Like, that can totally be a thing. Other things to consider, though, at this point would be... there are a few things that you can consider, okay? In Thaumaturgy, remember we talked about Thaumaturgy earlier, is there a play that could be made for Galegate for this gem-generating item, right? That is something worth considering. In Construction, if you're fighting a nation that has its own, let's say, so you can, most of the time as Tianchi you're going to be ahead a bit on tech, but what if somebody just went down Alteration and they've already got like Army of Lead? Then you definitely need to go down Construction 7 and get Weapons of Sharpness. While you're there, I would say you might as well grab Construction 8. There are a couple of really, really good artifacts that, even though you're not going to use them right away, maybe you want to put them on a Tartarian later on, it's great to snag them immediately. That is definitely something that you can consider doing. Again, Conjuration, I don't think would be appropriate at this level. If you've gone down to Alteration 7, Enchantment 8, somebody's got Conjuration 8, and they've got all the royalty already. So what's left? Well, Blood Magic. Now would be a decent time to go down Blood 7. It's not gonna take you a long time, right? So in this game, by the way, so right now it is turn 50. I've got 2,400 research going, and that is with like a huge pile of mages out here fighting a war. Like I said, I finished all the tech in the game. I finished like the entire tech tree on like turn 70, 2 or something in this game. So these last techs are going to go by really quickly. So getting from Blood 0 to Blood 7 is almost instantaneous. So the decision on whether to do that is going to depend on, did you get some random blood income, or can you trade for it? It's usually not worth spending your time with your pretender blood searching, although you can if you need to. Typically, he'll be forging or casting other spells, right, that he needs to be casting. But there are some sites that give random blood income. There are some thrones that do it, or you could trade for it. So at this point in the game, it's time to start looking at how you're going to get into blood, because you should be doing it sooner rather than later. I actually forget how I do it in this game. I mean, I definitely get into blood in a big way, and I honestly forget now how I get into it initially. I might trade for it. Eventually I get this throne, and this throne gives blood income, but I don't know if I break into blood before that or later. So in this case, at this point, it's not worth it for me to go into blood because I've only got 34 slaves. So you need 77 to get your first vampire. And after that, you're kind of all set. So that is definitely another possibility. And of course, finishing Alteration, if you're now at Alteration 7, going Alteration 8 and Alteration 9, obvious choice. Will of the Fates is a great spell, and Army of Lead is great. Finally, is it worth going down to Enchantment 9? It depends, but it certainly can be. If you're fighting any kind of nation that's doing demons, Demon Cleansing is amazing. And then Gaia's Blessing is really going to simplify your macro, but it is powerful because it means that you only need one mage to take care of all of your resists. It means you could do kind of simpler armies and that are very powerful. And that is something I'll talk about in another episode, but how you can kind of simplify your armies and have a very effective group of units with only a few buffs that really kind of can beat quite a significant army. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about all the research paths for the mid-game. So, in a couple of episodes ago, we had taken over Bandar Log. It was turn 30. That was the end of the early game. I spent most of the mid-game fighting this war. But, when we were planning... so how does this affect our build, right? Bring this all back to the idea, right? If you're imagining your future as Tianchi, what do you need to have in your build, right? So we know we're going to be researching, we're going to probably be prioritizing Enchantment 8 and Alteration 7. We want to be able to get into blood and death at this point in the game. So if you did not have blood or death access on your pretender, now is kind of the time that you turn 50, turn 60 is when you know that you could theoretically cast liches, right? So you kind of want to have climbed up the death ladder by then. If you don't have it on your pretender, you have to do it in Conjuration at Conjuration 7. So if you didn't get death on your pretender, you need to, I think Mount Fiends is what you want, right? You have like Death 1 indies. You can get, like, you got a sorcery ring to buff it to Death 2. You can build the staff that'll get you to Death 3. Then you can make your Mount Fiend. He's Death 3. With him and the staff and, let's say, the Ring of Sorcery, you can now get your Lich, okay? So that's an example where if you didn't have death on your pretender, you're going to want to, I think, get into Conjuration 7 maybe right now, right? That would definitely be a priority to start to get your death mages rolling, right? Similarly, this is when we can think about getting ready for blood access if we don't have it on our pretender, right? How are we going to eventually get into blood? In the very, very late game, you kind of have to. You have to find a way to get into it. In terms of fighting our actual battles, at this point, you can be recruiting all the units. So it's really about choosing from our big arsenal that we have as Tianchi, of choosing what are the correct units, to fight the war. In this case, I happen to be fighting Miklin. So if we take a look at the units that I was using, it was mostly all my Sacreds and then Heavy Cav. Because at this point in the game, we are beyond archers because everybody, he can do arrow fend. So archers are no longer really a thing. So we are relying on our Heavy Cav. So let me just highlight how good these guys are. Now, I mean, some of them are trained, right? But this unit, I talked about it briefly when we did the national overview, but it's amazing, I think. I mean, the stats are not unbelievable, but they're way better than average for a unit, and it's relatively cheap. This is like a budget Heavy Cap, okay? 35 gold, 29 resources. Versus versus other recruitable units, okay? So, I say chaff, but chaff sometimes is just referring to like these guys. These are definitely chaff, right? But versus almost every other nation in the game's average recruitable units, this guy will crush, okay? So you don't really need the amazing stats of Man or Alm or Marignon's heavy cavalry. This heavy cavalry is good enough to absolutely demolish chaff. And assuming you're buffing yours as much as they're buffing theirs, or in fact, we're probably buffing ours more because we have slightly better tech and we have access to all the buffs, this is just going to work out for us. So let me leave you with this battle. Now, actually, before this battle, sorry. I have the turns on another computer, but this battle took a long time. This war took a long time. It was a lot of positional play. There were a lot of tension between these provinces and fighting back and forth. I made some mistakes early on, lost some armies that I shouldn't have. But, after a lot of positional play, I finally was able to push him back into his capital, and this is sort of his last stand. But as you can see, he still has, a fairly respectable army, although I definitely think my army has the advantage. Let's slow this down. Oh my god, okay. So let's take a look at the kind of things that I've got here. Actually, you know what, I didn't lose a lot of guys, so let me show you here. You can see most of the script. I don't think I lost many guys, so you'll see everything here. We've got these Imperial Alchemists with crystal matrices. Okay, we've got a bit of temporary gems. So he's doing Thunderfen turn 2 because the Communion Slaves haven't Communion Slaved themselves yet on turn 1, so he can't cast it. So Earth Power, Thunderfen. So air resistance is taken care of. This guy is also doing Mass Protection. Okay, and then I have him doing Firefen much later in the script just to get it, but the other guys, like Miklin, isn't doing fire damage, so it's not an issue. Turn 1 anti-magic. And most of my astral mages, I default to Celestial Chastisement. This is A really strong Tianchi unique spell. I've talked about it before. That's great at dealing with elementals. And good players will summon elementals during fights, so definitely do that. Here we've got Divine Blessing, Communion Master, Fanaticism, etc. Typical stuff for your Prophet. I've given him some token gear, which he keeps like until the end of the game, just to make sure he doesn't die to a stray arrow. A lot of units. Again, I've got these guys not on Communion Masters. I think I felt the Communion was a little too imbalanced if I had these guys on there too. I'm not sure why. But anyways, the priority is, again, Celestial Chastisement to get rid of those air elementals or whatever they're throwing at us. Communion Slaves. Here's our Master Generation. Here is our Fog Warriors. Here I have a double, also doing Thunderfen and Mass Protection of Firefen. So I've got two guys basically with the same kit, just in case something were to happen, because these are very important buffs. I've got a double for Fog Warriors, and I've got a double for Master Generation. So especially if you're humans, your guys can die to, random assassinations, to a lot of things. You need to double up on all of your big battlefield buffs, which is what we've done here. Finally, we've got a Bane Lord. This was like a little thug that I had going because he's kind of cute. He's actually got a black halberd, which was borrowed from, not borrowed, but I bought it from Ulm. But yeah, he's just a little tough guy. I was using him to help counter some of the raiding they were doing. You can see here we've actually got another one set up. He's got a Vine Shield with a Firebrand. So these are kind of decent thugs. They've got 42 hit points. They're undead, so they're immune to a lot of garbage that people throw at you. They've got a nice chill aura, which is kind of nice as well. But they're much better if you can buff them a little more with some mages around them, which is what is happening here. Okay, let's finally look at the battle. So let's wait until the spells come up. Okay, so, and we have a bunch of random, I think I must have stolen this from him at some point, this Monster Toad, so he's out in front. You can see my formation, because this is a fort battle. Okay, so a few things are important here. He's got flyers, right? You can see they're right here. He's got, that's his, this is his Pretender, apparently. By the way, his bless was Shock Weapons, Bark Skin, and Fate Weaving. Okay, so yeah, so he's got flyers because his Sacreds, these guys, these Eagle Warriors can fly. So it's really important that I very generously cushion the back of my army to make sure he doesn't just come and murder all my mages. The mages all have bodyguards, but you can see that I've piled on some extra chaff at the back on hold and attack closest. I've got some Sacreds in the back, hold and attack closest. And then all my beef, all my heavy cav is just in a big blob to protect the mages. In front, we've got some Sacreds that are just going to try to charge through the front gate. Okay, so here you can see all the buffs are coming up. I don't remember seeing Arrow Fend. I don't know if we can see it come up here. Maybe I don't do Arrow Fend. I'm not sure. He casts Arrow Fend. One of his guys over here casts it. So, Tabrock casts it. I think that's my guy. So, okay, so we do both cast Arrow Fend. I must have missed it. So at this point, that's why everybody's got Arrow Fend, which is why, archers at this point are pretty useless. But I do have to protect against these guys so they don't snipe my mages. We've got Anti-Magic. Here you can see he's spamming out Living Clouds, a bunch of air elementals. Now I'm already on the second wave of casts here. So far we've only got Arrow Fend up as a buff. And here come, you can see he's got some Springhawks, which are summoned. He's got Sacreds that are landing in a big pile. And you can see they've, in their first attack wave, they've basically chewed through the little chaff that I had here. but they're not going to get through this heavy cav. But that's why it's really important to protect your behind from flyers. Okay, now you can see he has cleverly got some guys scripted on Magic Duel, because he was hoping to snipe some of my cap only mages. But I've got a lot of communion slaves that are all astral mages, so it's unlikely statistically that he connects with somebody that he actually wants to hit. Okay, round 2 of spells is about to hit. So Thunderfend. Now everything in my army has shock resist. In fact, do we have... Yeah, okay, just shock resist. We've got Serpent's Blessing, so now we also have poison resist. I wasn't sure if he was going to do Foul Vapor. We've got Wind Guide. And then... here we go. Fog Warriors, Relief, Mass Regeneration. I don't know if we've got... No, Mass Protection hasn't come on yet. Fanaticism. And our own Mass Flight, by the way, right? So... You can see at this point, so his guys, attacked rear right at the beginning. All of these units are scripted to hold an attack rear. Not hold attack rear, to hold an attack closest, because I knew I was going to get a bunch of, sacreds here fighting me. But then the bulk of this army, normally in a throne battle, you just have them charge through the front. But in this case, we're going to go right over the walls and... land here. Okay, so you can actually see I've just in that turn I landed and killed some of his key mages. I think I killed his storm. I don't know where it was, but you can see the red. You can see the numbers. These are my sacred cav. They were on hold and attack rear, so they just landed with their lances, and this is what right there: 20 attack, 23 defense. I don't think I've got mass protection up yet for some reason. They're regenerating, mist form, arrow fend. They're in great shape. So they just kind of landed randomly and got some of his mages, because you can see his formation is a little too sparse to defend against flyers. Meanwhile, back here, these green lights are Celestial Chastisement. So I've got all that scripted, and so all of his air elementals that he's summoned are just getting completely shredded. There's mass protection. Okay, now we have it. So now, yeah, see, these guys have 21 protection now with mass protection. A little bit of fire vulnerability. Now, Mictlan isn't a nation that can really exploit that, so we are okay with them having that. And you can see these guys were all on hold and attack closest to make sure that our mages didn't get killed by these sacreds. Meanwhile, this is sort of what a mid-game army is going to look like as Tien, right? You've got this guy, I don't know, he's got 2 wounds or whatever, but, 21 protection, 22 defense, 18 attack, hits like a truck. What are we fighting? We're fighting Sun Warriors with, fair enough, he's got 20 protection because he's got some buffs on. He's got whatever his bless is. Thunder weapons, that's not going to do anything because we've got shock resistance. And look at his attack and defense because he's just never going to touch me, right? And so now we'll speed it up a little bit. But you can see that, what's this last... Fire Fend is finally coming online. I was like, what's that buff? But it's not only and look, even these heavy cav, right, are coming in. 21 protection, 16 defense with the charge. Zoop, 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 kills everything. And so, yeah. So this is how I think as MA Tien, you're going to end up winning your mid-game wars. You have your troops in general are going to be better than the opponent's troops. Because I just think Tienchi has a really nice roster of troops. Whether or not you're using your sacreds a lot, like all these guys are quite reasonable. Your magic diversity and communions means that you can cast every single spell in the game, and so you should, right? What's making, look, the war was kind of over already because this is his last remaining army, but what's making the difference here is that my guys have every single buff, right? We've got fatigue is not an issue because we've got reinvigoration. We've got protection buffing stuff. We've got all the resists we could need. We've got fog warriors. We've got mass flight. I can cast all of those things, and it's really hard to deal with that. Even if I had shitty units, they would be good with all these buffs. I happen to have good units, so they're amazing with these buffs. And really, in this case, there's nothing that they could do to stop that. And so that is how the war with Mictlan ended. Now, I'm saying that I'm simplifying it a lot because there's a lot of, maybe the best way to fight this army is not to fight it straight on. There are some kind of cheeky things, maybe some thuggy super combatant things that you might try to do against it. But at this point in the game is pretty much the height of the power curve, I think, of a nation like Tienchi. Before, right around turn 50, 60, 70, you've got all the end game research that is important and your opponents are still far away from getting it. You've got a great army that can receive those buffs. So it's time to take advantage before, by turn 90, the opponents have all gotten, all your enemies have all finished their research and you've had it for 20 turns. So now you're pretty much on an even footing. So that is that. And I'm going to end the episode now. Let's see the report here of the battle. So we lost, a handful of guys. We lost 12 Geomancers. I think some might have been too, I might have unbalanced the communion a little bit. I forget exactly how most of them died. But if you see here, we lost 23 of our 125 heavy cav. We lost 4 of our sacred heavy cav. They killed, you can see what's doing the killing here. It's my cavalry, the Red Guards and the Imperial Horsemen. Of course, that's what I brought to bear. So of course, that's what died. And we murdered everything. Look, obviously my army was double his, so it's not surprising that I won this battle. But it wasn't for lack of army size. Most of the fight, you saw my heavy cav was just standing behind each other. If he had brought double the number of Eagle Warriors, it would not have changed anything, right? My units were just way stronger, way more buffed than his were. Okay, that's going to be it for this episode. I think I'm going to take a break before I record the next ones, but I will start to think about talking about the end game and the various aspects of that, specifically for Tienchi. And also, meanwhile, I would like to, like I said, I will look through my saved files, my saved games. I want to try to find, there were some pretty great battles that I saw between other players, and I do want to try to find some of those and share those with you. So we'll see if we can do that. Until then, take care.